friends. The video that you're going to be watching today is actually one that I initially posted on my ADHD channel, and it was something that I realized actually how to place both there and here. So if you find it here and you like ADHD app stuff and you want to kind of follow along with that and kind of listen to what life is like with ADHD and other things that I have learned to do with ADHD and that I try to teach people to do with ADHD, check that out. And if you didn't, or if that doesn't sound like you, then stay here, subscribe, hang out. Can't hurt. Okay, that's it. On to the video. What's up, suckers? How are you doing? I'm doing swell. In case you didn't catch the one time I mentioned it offhand like 2 videos ago, I finished a book, a first draft actually, and I am working on finishing it. This is not actually the first book I've ever finished. I actually released one in 2020 called Shame on You, Big Truth from a Bad Mom. It was written by me for moms specifically, but like parents in general. And this is my first fiction novel that I have finished. I've actually been writing since I was 6 years old and have started God knows how many stories, and this is the first one I have finished. I'm in the middle of revisions. I finished this damn thing with 1 day left in the year of 2024. And I actually have a second channel that I have started where I am talking about that book, my process, probably going to talk about some other story and book and writing related things. It's not just for authors, it's also for readers. So if you want to go check out that channel, the link for that's in the description. There's really only going to be this video up there right now and an intro video, but I will be posting more as I go. And it should be a great time, hopefully, for anybody who's interested either in finishing a book or in seeing how my book goes. I'm going to be trying to see if I can get it traditionally published, but I'm also impatient and don't really feel like waiting forever. So if nobody has shown interest in the book by the time I'm ready for it, then I'm just going to release it myself. So we'll see. But I wanted to put out a video about this because I know that people with ADHD struggle, especially with big projects. And if there is a project that is big, if there's any project that's huge, it's finishing a book, especially one that is hundreds of pages long. Mine is over 300 pages long. And some of you may not even really need this advice, and you're like, this is stupid. And in that case, sorry, go find another video. I'll be back with another one next time that has nothing to do with books, so I don't know. See you later. But for the rest of you, I wanted to go ahead and talk about what I did to get through the executive dysfunction, to get through the moments of doubt. This isn't even an exhaustive list. It's just the first things that I could think of that really helped me. And if you are one of those super lucky people who can hyper-focus for hours and hours and just turn out a book in 2 days, good for you. I am not one of those people. My friend Ellis, who is a fantastic writer and has a really cool urban fantasy series out, you should go check out his website. It's also in the description, is one of those people. So I have nothing but love for you guys. Super happy for you. But like I said, this is for the people who are not like this. So I finished my first draft in 17 months. And it was probably closer to 18. I don't know. Who's counting? Not me. There were only a few things that finally got me to really hunker down and finish this thing. And I'm not going to get into the whole backstory of what made me write this, whatever. That'll be for the other channel at some point. But I am going to talk about a few methods that worked really well for me. And if this helps you, I really hope it does. Great. And if it doesn't, but you still think that I'm neat, please think of liking and subscribing and then coming back for, me to talk about apps or something. Okay, so on with the show. Let's talk about method number 1. So the first thing that helped me out was to make sure that I could see my progress as I wrote. And I know that some of you got your comment fingies typing and you're going to say something about how, I always look at my word count when I'm done in Google Docs or in Microsoft Word. And That's not what I mean. If you cannot see where you are now in relation to where you've been, it's going to feel disjointed and it's not going to do anything for that reward center in your brain. I'll give you an example that's not writing related. When I was first working out, I would always feel like I wasn't doing very well. I would be like, I look the same as I did yesterday. I really don't see what the difference is. At the end of a week, I was like, I don't see what the difference is. Until I realized that the mistake was that I wasn't taking progress photos. Progress photos are hugely important because even though you may think there's no difference, there is. There always is. But it's such a gradual difference that you won't always be able to tell how far you've gotten. The same goes, believe it or not, for when you're writing a large project like this, when you're working on a book. Because even though I can look at my screen and say, hey, I'm on chapter 23, it doesn't really mean anything to that part of your brain, to that reward center in your brain, unless you are able to look at it and say, look at the space between chapter 13 and chapter 1. That's a lot of space. I covered that. Overall, ADHD brains are constantly moving super fast. We're awful at pausing in the moment to absorb achievements. We don't do well at that. So making sure that you have some sort of tracker, some sort of physical way to keep track of your progress, it also forces you to give yourself credit for the work that you've done, which does a lot for your motivation and for your executive dysfunction. And it depends on what you want to do. Some people decide that they're just going to use like those progress bar word counters. Some people build ones. I've seen some built in ClickUp that were pretty cool. There are free ones that you can get online. You can make your own in Google Sheets, however you want to do it. Because I knew that if I put enough effort in it, I would actually do what I came here to do, I actually would make one every month where I would trace out like 30 to 31 squares, and then every time I wrote, I would color it in. And whatever your metric is, just be clear about it before you sit down to color in one of those squares or to fill it in, whatever. If you want to make it about word count, great. If you want to make it about page count, great. If you want to make it about the fact that you just sat down and worked on something, great. It doesn't matter. All you need to do is be able to show that you've made the progress and to have some way to keep track of that. Which brings me to method number 2, which is that you want to make sure that you are rigid but flexible. And all y'all need to put your shoes down and stop getting ready to hit me. Okay, I know it sounds weird putting it that way, but that's the way ADHD brains are. We need structure, but if we are told what to do with too much of that structure, we become contrary assholes and we don't want to do it. So what you need to do is you need to come up with rules, but you need to have ways that those rules can be stretched. And the example I just gave you is kind of what I mean. Like, I had a rule, this was a writing tracker, but I allowed myself, when I wasn't feeling like writing, to be allowed to sit down and color in a square if I sat down and revised, or if I sat down and I wrote something else, like if I wrote copy instead of my book. I still made sure that I gave myself credit for working, even if it wasn't necessarily on that novel, which made me more willing to work on the novel because I didn't feel quite as pressured. The same concept could go for anything, really. If you're doing word count, for example, and you're like, oh, I need to write 500 words a day, but you're like, if I'm going to fill in a square for 500 words, what if I don't have 500 words in me? There's actually a hilarious free writing concept where every time that you don't know what word to type in next, you just actually type up the word word, which is great because then you're reading things like, he walked slowly through the forest, word, 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 the moon was full, word, 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 but you still get to 500 words that way. So that's also an option if you are looking for a way to kind of make sure that your rules are rigid but flexible. So method number 3 is going to irritate some writers and validate others. And that's that if you need to take days off, take days off. I know that a lot of people, especially people who are writing books, feel that they must write every day. How do I sit down and write every day? How do I set up a writing practice? How do I write regularly? And the fact is, not everybody needs to do that. I've talked with people before, and I told them that I've realized that there are two types of writers. There are what I call bulldozers, and there are people who I call architects. Bulldozers are able to push through sickness, fatigue, irritation, overwhelm to write. That's just what they can do. They push through. And generally that's because writing has become some sort of therapy for them, or it's become so ingrained in them that they can do it regardless of whether or not they are dealing with writer's block or anything of that nature. Architects, which I am, are people who need to write down their plans and then step back, look at what they have, and return to it a little bit later. One is not any better than the other. I do feel that a lot of people tend to act like bulldozers are the best, but that's not necessarily the case. I think that the write every day idea actually serves to present more pressure for people than it does to motivate. And I know what I'm going to hear from my audience. I know that there are ADHDers out there who are going to say, but if I don't pressure myself, I won't do it. And I'm not saying that you don't need any pressure. I'm just saying that unless you are writing for a publishing house, unless you are writing something that has a hard deadline, you can give your brain breaks. ADHD brains especially, but I think any brain really, struggles to move forward when it doesn't know where to go next. We don't do well when we don't know what to do next. And sometimes you need to give your brain the time to think about where to go next. So I usually suggest taking time away. That's what I did. The mistake that I made, that I am suggesting that you do not make, is that you make sure that you set a time that you are coming back to this project. When I did my first book, my rule was 48 hours. This book, I did not set a rule, and I wound up not touching the damn thing for 3 months at one point, 1 month at another. You get the point. So after a while, I started saying, I'm coming back to this in a week, or I'm coming back to this on Sunday or Tuesday or whatever. And I would make sure that I put it somewhere so that I wouldn't forget. And I never did forget, because this piece really meant a lot to me. But I know for a fact that if I hadn't set a time, I would have left it on a shelf forever. And you're right there. But you don't have to push yourself to ridiculous levels to be able to work on something that matters to you, to work on a big project. Sometimes it is okay to give yourself breaks. Most times, especially for ADHD brains, it is okay to give yourself breaks, even in creative situations, especially in creative situations. And finally, method 4, this is the one that I think we all struggle with, ADHD or not. I had to learn to allow myself to suck. I feel like part of what stops a lot of people from getting that first draft done is that a first draft is inherently horrific. It's bad. It's always going to have plot holes and bad lines and paragraphs that sound like something that you would find in a novel that like a 4-year-old wrote. Maybe that's a little young. A 4-year-old's, I'm just like imagining a 4-year-old's novel being like, today I finally used the toilet without the help of an adult. It was amazing. And amazing is spelled with like a backwards Z or some shit. So maybe not 4. But my point being that we don't sound the way that we want to sound in the very beginning. And especially when you have ADHD and you're used to being misunderstood as much as you already are, and as afraid of imperfection as a lot of us tend to be, a first draft is like the antithesis of all of that. And it makes it very hard to appreciate, to accept, to work on. I get it. We don't like to suck. but you have to suck to eventually get to the point where you don't suck. And the thing is, we could hear all day long that a first draft is supposed to be bad. We can hear that the people who we really look up to wrote a bad first draft, right? But the fact is, when it finally comes down to us allowing ourselves to suck, it's hard. We can't really do it that well. So there's a whole lot that also plays into this that we will eventually, that I'll be talking about on my other channel at some point, I think, that has to do with really kind of getting into who you are and how that connects to what you write, and that's a whole nother thing. But if you're not trying to get to that and you're just trying to figure out how to be okay with perfectionism, there are two big things that helped me out a lot. The first, that friend Ellis of mine, who I mentioned earlier on in the video, gave me what was my favorite advice of the whole process. Ellis said, the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. That is writing specific. And it is fantastic because it is true. We are always afraid of how perfectly the story is going to come out. But the truth is, in the very beginning, nobody else has heard the story. I was in a little bit of a pickle because I couldn't keep it 100% to myself, and I did still need some accountability. So I was reading chapter by chapter to my husband. But thankfully, my husband is also a person who knows me very well and knows when I'm just writing shit to fill a spot. And so it went well. But I would definitely suggest maybe not doing that unless it's a person you really, really trust who is not going to laugh at you or tell you that they never want to speak to you again if you write something really stupid, or if you follow that word idea, it doesn't mind you saying the word for a whole page. The other way that I learned was actually taught in a workshop at the Chase the Chaos Summit that I run every year, which is the Neurodivergent Adult Summit that I do online. Be doing that again this year. Very excited to do so. It was taught by Maddie Gabor of Betterment Works. I will put her link in the description in case you have a business that wants to learn how to play through hard things. It was a really, really cool workshop overall, but the big thing, my favorite thing that I learned was how to push through the mental wall that perfectionism can build, and by doing and in doing so, being able to eventually work towards a solution. And the way that you do that is you give yourself permission to be ridiculous right off the jump. That word idea that I told you earlier is kind of in the same vein, but this one is a little bit more intentional. So instead of sitting there and thinking about, how do I get through this problem in a super cool, impressive, effective way, you actually subvert your own expectations by saying, what is the dumbest way that I could get through this right now? Or how would a 7-year-old do it? Or what's the best way that I could do this that involves a sock on my head? Something that is absolutely just outside of what you're really looking for. And strangely, counterintuitively, the moment that you start to allow yourself to do things like that, that is where that perfectionism wall breaks down, and generally you will wind up with something that you are much happier with. It worked really well, actually, in my first draft situation, because when I would have moments where I'm saying, I don't have any idea how to get from this scene to the next scene that I kind of already have envisioned, I would start out saying, all right, they get into a canoe and they row down the Candy Cane River. And they roll out of the canoe, and then they roll their way to the next scene. They don't even use their feet. And obviously, that is not what I wrote. I would sit there and then I'd say, okay, that's actually really silly and funny, but there is something to this way that I'm looking at it. What if we did X, Y, and Z? And the next thing I know, I would have at least a passable scene to get me to the next portion. So that is also a way to do it. Allow yourself to suck. In fact, invite yourself to suck. Challenge yourself to suck. And you would be surprised how quickly that turns into an actual answer you're looking for. So those are the main things that helped me out. I'm sure I will come up with more. If you want to know more, please feel free to go ahead and comment here and ask, or join me on the other channel and ask, and I would be happy to go ahead and answer for you. And if this really helped you, please just make sure that you like and subscribe, or subscribe to my other channel, or do both. It'd be great to see you all the time. Okay, thank you very much for watching this. Drink lots of water, and I will see you in the next video.